that has really high nutritional value.
That's Tom Adams, the CEO of Pairwise, a startup that is working to bring these new gene-edited foods to supermarket shelves. Adams says, unlike most GMOs, his products only have genes that naturally occur in their species. Ponsi Trevisvavet is the CEO of Inari, which is developing crops that grow better without as much water or farmland. She says genetic engineering with CRISPR is like hitting the fast-forward button on conventional crop breeding. Just
from circular
cycle, and we want you to enjoy the ride back up.
Do you hear that? The prediction the stock would climb? Well, that type of positive spin would eventually get Ken Lay in big trouble with federal criminal authorities. I should note here that Lay would plead not guilty to charges of misleading investors, but he was ultimately convicted in 2006. That conviction was vacated because of his death shortly after the trial. His optimism at that meeting in 2001 would soon collide with a reality Rebecca and I were on the hunt to uncover. After the break, an Enron insider reaches out. My interview with him, just to see if anything jumped out. It was 37 pages, single-spaced, and pretty dense. I was on deadline, so I scanned some important sections, including one titled Related Party Transactions. These are outside business deals involving directors or top officers. It's what I've always thought of as a company's potential dirty laundry list. And there, I found something most unusual. Something that ended up being a big deal. Deep in the document was a reference to outside partnerships that were doing vast amounts of business with Enron, worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
These were not something that Enron had ever talked about in any setting I'd ever been in. So it seemed to come out of the blue.
Rebecca also hadn't heard about these partnerships from stock analysts who followed Enron. Now, the descriptions of the transactions in the SEC filings were so convoluted, they were practically gibberish. But one thing was clear, and it stunned me. The partnerships had been run and partly owned by a senior executive of Enron. It didn't take me long to think conflict of interest. It raised the possibility that a senior executive of Enron might be making money for himself and his partners at the expense of his employer and its shareholders. It seemed to me, at the very least, an outrageous arrangement. Rebecca agreed.
It's as simple as saying you can't serve two masters. If you're in arrangements in which you're on both sides of a transaction, you're going to have to pick which side to favor. They're never going to be equally treated.
At first, I suspected the unnamed executive running the partnerships might be former CEO Jeff Skilling. After all, that person had just quit the partnerships, according to the SEC filing, and Skilling had just quit the company. I hurriedly called Palmer again. He was essentially the only source I had at Enron. Palmer said the partnerships were fully disclosed and completely above board.
It had been all approved, that the accountants, the lawyers, the board, everybody had approved it, so it was fine.
Palmer said the partnership simply provided outside capital that helped the company. It was the company line. Ken Lay told us the same thing in a subsequent interview. During that call, Palmer told me the executive who'd headed those partnerships wasn't Skilling. It was Enron's chief financial officer, Andy Fastow, who was still working at Enron. It was the first time I'd ever heard Fastow's name. It would hardly be the last. Now, to be clear, Mark Palmer was never accused of wrongdoing by authorities, but he suspected something was up with these partnerships. Many months later, he confided to me that he sensed people inside Enron were concerned.
Maybe I should have asked a hell of a lot more questions.
Yeah, clearly, Rebecca and I also needed to ask a hell of a lot more questions. It felt like we weren't getting the truth, hitting walls.
We hit something, we bounce off, we go on another direction, we come back, we bounce against it again. We're Roombas, we just keep moving.
We looked back at some of the prior SEC filings, and we saw these partnerships had been up and running for a while, and they dealt with a lot of money during that time.
You know, their annual filing in 2000 said that these enterprises were conducting more than $1 billion worth of business with Enron. Well, that's a massive number. But there was absolutely nothing in it to tell you what these relationships were.
And on top of that, we noticed Enron had some of its own stock tied up in these deals, 12 million shares of it. And we knew the stock had dipped, potentially crippling those deals.
From circular plastics to low-carbon technologies, Dow has been a trailblazer in developing products that help to conserve our planet. Dow, imagine better. Learn more at dow.com/imaginebetter.
For most forward, that's after the break. Gustav Klimt's most important commissioned works, the faculty paintings, were lost to a fire. This left art historians like Dr. Franz Smola, a curator at the Belvedere Museum, with photographs and descriptions of what they might have looked like.
For art history, the paintings had been very important, but since they did not exist, and since only black and white images exist, they came a little bit out of sight of our attention, of the art historians. We knew about them, but since we had not so much knowledge about their colors, they were not so important to us anymore.
So this is where AI steps in. The Google Arts and Culture team approached Smola and the Belvedere Museum with an idea. let's train an AI model to analyze all of Klimt's works and figure out what colors these paintings really were. But just analyzing all of Klimt's works wasn't enough to create a good indication of the colors. The team gathered information about Klimt's style at the time and what people said about these paintings. And lucky for them, the faculty paintings caused a bit of a stir.
I took the colors from the criticism of a lot of the writings of the journals, of the newspapers, which had described the faculty paintings at the time when they had been presented in several exhibitions and when there was this scandal, this excitement. And this was an advantage for us because the authors had described them very carefully and also the colors.
That information went to Emil Wallner at the Google Arts and Culture team.
These critics, they were scattered all over the place. So in newspapers, in exhibition catalogs, and finding all of these evidence and putting them in one place, that's a huge piece of work by itself. And then when I was creating an AI model to create colorizations, that was also a very difficult process.
Smola collected all the details he knew about what the paintings looked like, so Wallner could have a baseline to work off of. But their initial model didn't look right, and the team needed more information than Klimt's catalog was able to provide. The Google team only had 80 full-color images of Klimt's works, but the algorithm needs roughly 5,000 images to learn a single object in a painting. So they expanded the database with works from thousands of artists.
So then I had to kind of retrain it on a lot of artworks first, 100,000, so that it could create kind of a model of the world and understand what motifs were and kind of the entire scene of a painting. And then we could use Klimt's artwork to kind of add his colors and his biases to it.
Smola came back in to make sure the result was still in line with how the works were described at the time, like quality control. The result, 3 colorized images, based on the existing black and white photos. Now, they aren't meant to be hung in a museum in place of the real thing, but more to provide an idea of what these 3 paintings might have looked like.
Philosophy in general is a bit green, and you have a sphinx as the main motif, and you have like colorful stars. And then medicine is a lot of death, a lot of life. It's a little bit of blue, a little bit of gray, a lot of reds. Jurisprudence is a little bit more shocking. So you have gold, you have red, you have black, and you have this creature in the middle.
When the recolorizations were released last year, not everyone in the art community was on board with the results, especially Jane Collier.
They have absolutely no subtlety in terms of the coloration.
As president of the Collier Research Institute and director of the Galerie Saint-Étienne in New York, she specializes in Austrian and German expressionism.
Either the solid colors or also the variations, from one segment of the painting to another segment of the painting. So you might have a background color and a flesh color and a drapery color, and the relationships between those components are extremely jarring. They really look much more like cartoons of some sort than they do like Klimt paintings.
She looks to an original Klimt painting hanging in her office to help prove her point when it comes to the AI's recolorization.
It was called Island in the Ottersee. It was done around the same time as the university paintings, around 1901. Now, if you look at this painting,
college degrees. Like there's so many dimensions to this problem to solve that I think the mission became the thing, that how do we actually unlock the best career opportunity for everyone at scale? And we had the team, and we do have the team that we believe, I think we can do it, and it's happening. So that was a compelling part. And now, as you were sharing, fortunately, all the hard work has been coupled with lots of people who have believed in the same opportunity of both AI, Eightfold, and what we should be doing for each other. And here we are with, I think today we are being used in about 140 countries, 18, 19 languages, with some of the most iconic companies on the planet. So it's just a pleasure to be doing, I think, what everybody is looking to solve now.
Incredible progress. Congrats to you and Ashutosh and the team. And to, like I mentioned, Shugarg is a friend of the podcast. He was on last year sometime. I have to look up which episode. But just congrats to all of you. Great journey. Talk us through how a typical customer uses the platform.
I think there are several use cases. Some of them start with solving for the employees. Initially, a lot of the focus was on internal mobility. And then the additional use cases are, especially these days, a lot of discussion around upskilling. And then the second one where you can actually start using Eightfold is on the hiring side. And I'll get into some of the details on how this all comes together. And the other thing that we did 2 years ago when COVID started was to help a company during the restructuring process. And now it turns out more companies will need to do that because of economic conditions. And the fourth use case is for your contingent workforce. And then we've also now built a multi-sided marketplace, what we call Workforce Exchange, that's being used by State of New York, State of Indiana, 110, etc. These are large ecosystems with multiple employers on one side and the general population on the other side. And how do you actually provide both the matching capability, but also how to get them to learn the skills that are needed. So multiple ways to engage. What we do is actually tap into whatever data sets are available, whether it's integration through HRIS, ATS, in some cases nothing, like in case of exchanges, and then marry that with all the global data that we have under our hood anyways, to make sure that every organization has a running start with our AI. So the value of anonymized aggregate learning, that's what we are bringing to every client, because everyone now is looking for essentially on one side the same talent, right? Whether you're a bank, whether you're Google, whether you're services company, everybody needs digital talent. So it becomes more about really understanding people.
Yep, people have trust issues with tech companies. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace Tech. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino. Bashing big tech has become something of a rare unifying pastime in these divided times. But more nuanced views in our world of thumbs up and crying emoji can be harder to pin down. Well, researchers from the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University want to shed more light on the attitudes of Americans more broadly and how they view our biggest tech firms. The center worked with YouGov on its latest poll, which found there's plenty of distrust. But in the words of Facebook relationship status, it's complicated. Taylor Barkley is Technology and Innovation Director at CGO. He says respondents made distinctions between various tech companies.
So in our latest poll, TikTok and Facebook were the most distrusted companies, and Amazon and Google were the most trusted.
What do you think informs the variation that you see there?
It's difficult to tell for sure, but what really hopped out to us in our data was partisan identification and level of political activity. So we asked respondents, do they identify as conservative, liberal, or Democrat, Republican, as well as we had 4 categories to gauge political interest. Hardly at all, and the other end was most of the time. And those who paid attention, most of the time had the highest level of distrust, and those who paid attention hardly at all on political issues had the lowest levels of distrust or the most trust. Another thing that jumps out to us is the most distrusted companies in our survey this year and in the prior 3 surveys going back to 2020 are social media companies. More than others on the list, they're dealing with issues of speech. I think the public can perceive them as arbiters of speech, and of course, speech issues get caught up into political considerations. So those who are paying attention to politics most of the time, as opposed to hardly at all, I think that will greatly sway their perceptions and trust of these companies.
So do you think non-social media companies like Amazon and Google just seem more trustworthy, sort of in relief to social media companies, or are they representing something to people that makes them more trustworthy?
I think, across the board, I think all these companies, for most Americans, their experience of these platforms and services are good. They work as they should. They're helpful in their daily life, providing positive benefits. And I think, one thing that, I've been wrestling with, thinking about is, perhaps using a social media company, it's a little less clear, what is the benefit to me? Maybe it gives me, I can see family and friends and stay connected and watch interesting videos. But when I use Amazon, for instance, I'm there to shop. I'm there to find something that's helpful. And I think, I'm trusting them with my credit card data, for instance. And it's a much clearer, one-to-one connection between the benefit I get out of their services as opposed to, say, a social media company. So that might be another aspect.
So this issue of speech was clearly important. And the way these social media platforms moderate content also was something important that you asked about. What did you find in terms of how people feel about that?
So overwhelmingly, we found that people think social media companies are justified in removing users that violate their rules, removing content they think poses a risk to public health and safety, even removing elected officials who are disruptive or violate their rules. And these numbers are the 70% to 60% level. So it's pretty overwhelming support. And our survey also found an overwhelming support for free speech, being 86% of Americans and respondents in our poll said that free speech offered positive benefits for society.
Given some of these positive responses, how do you reconcile the high level of distrust? What's behind that contradiction?
I think here it goes back to levels of political interest and activity. The contradiction is most with those who are the least politically active. So in other words, most politically active are split between whether social media companies are justified in removing content or not. It was a pretty even, disagreement and agreement numbers, as it were. Whereas those who are hardly at all politically interested, it was 6% say disagreeing with the justification of removing content, and 45% agreeing that they were justified.
A gaming industry legend looks to the future. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace Tech. I'm Kimberly Adams. Video games are more technologically sophisticated than ever these days. Virtual reality headsets, augmented reality integration, and some of the most powerful and realistic graphics yet. But at the end of the day, a good, innovative video game needs an important element. And according to one industry veteran, it's this.
If it's not fun, why bother?
That's Reggie Fils-Aimé, former president of Nintendo of the Americas. He retired in 2019 and has a new autobiography out today, Disrupting the Game, From the Bronx to the Top of Nintendo. I spoke with him about where the innovation is happening in gaming right now, and he says you just need to look at who's creating those fun interactions.
The key innovation will come from smaller independent developers. These are developers who are finding ways to deliver just outstanding content, oftentimes onto your mobile phone with greater access. These are the developers who are taking more risks in coming up with new ideas. Some small examples in the gaming space, but not a traditional game. You look at what Wordle has been able to do, the word puzzle. It's taken popular culture by storm, and it was created by a single individual.
Staying on the topic of innovation, there's some discussion about integrating new technology into the next generation of games like blockchain and cryptocurrencies, maybe creating ecosystems where gamers can make money just by playing the game or harvesting digital items. Skeptics are worried about potential scams or exploitative loopholes if we bring these systems into games. Do you think there's a way to integrate that kind of technology constructively here?
I really do. And I say this because not all that long ago, There were similar concerns about free-to-play games, games where you would start playing a game and then need to either invest significant time or small amounts of money in order to progress in the game. And there was very strong negative initial reaction to this concept. But as developers figured out the right balance in encouraging players to play through the game in order to progress or to spend small amounts of money, developers found a way to get that balance right and to deliver some exceptional content. But there's a big caveat, and the caveat is that it needs to be done smartly. It needs to be incorporated into the game at the very beginning versus something that feels like a bolt-on attachment that really doesn't serve the player. And it needs to offer some compelling and unique benefit to the player that they can't get today in existing games.
You know, when I was a kid, you could borrow games from friends. You could rent them, you could buy them used because they were physical cartridges. And that allowed people to access games they might not otherwise be able to afford. With games now being digital or streamed more often, how do we maintain that kind of access to the best games across different economic groups?
You know, today, physical games still account for about 40% of the software being sold. And this is specifically with gaming dedicated consoles like the Nintendo Switch, like the Xbox and PlayStation devices. So it's still quite significant. But the point that you're making, which is absolutely true, the industry needs to make sure that compelling software is being provided or offered at a range of different price points with a range of different accessibility in order to continue growing. This is done, for example, on the Nintendo Switch, that as long as another individual has their own Nintendo Switch, you can share the game electronically as long as you do, as long as you have the game downloaded on your system. In the work I do now in retirement, working with independent developers and helping them create compelling content, and typically at lower price points, it's a key need to make sure that the accessibility to great content is as broad as possible.
If you cut it, does it not bleed? Well, no. But it will heal. Yes, this week on Download This Show, skin. Real human skin. They're attaching it to robots now. But why? Also, the controversial plan to use drones armed with tasers to stop US school shootings. And does Google really have a sentient artificial intelligence on their hands? Let's find out. This is your guide to the week in media, technology and culture. My name is Mark Fennell, and welcome to Download This Show. Tess.
And that's really scary. That's the next level. For me, it's very scary when you don't know if you're talking to a human or a robot, because this, when it comes to ethics, using AI and using that to judge humans or communicate with humans, is very underregulated. And as long as underregulated, you can design things that goes out of control.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first reaction lots of us have, Seamus, is one of fear. I'm not going to lie. My first reaction was exactly the same as Manal's. Is that the right reaction, or should we be approaching it differently, do you think?
Oh, look, I love every time these kinds of conversations come up. I'm firmly in the camp that, of course, it is just a very, very clever computer, and we've gotten to that point of being able to develop these kinds of things. But when it comes to that question of communicating, I think it's absolutely right that we have to be careful. And you might remember a few years ago when Google first demonstrated their ability to have your personal assistant like ring up a restaurant on your behalf to make a booking, and that it was able to have that conversation and to go through that process. But then as the feedback came in, Google realized, we need to actually make sure that the assistant says something at the start to acknowledge that the person is talking to a computer and not to a real person, because it is kind of unfair to try to intentionally confuse somebody about what it is they're talking to. And I think those kinds of questions are really important.
Yeah, deepfake is another important thing, using AI to trick you into that you're looking at a video of a real person without labeling it, this is deepfake.
Yeah, I guess that's the starting point, right? Your starting point is you've got to be honest about what it is you're dealing with. When it comes, I mean, you must dig into this all the time, Manal. The ethics of AI technology is one of the biggest ethical challenges it's facing in the future, because it's coming at us fast, and as you say, it's not regulated. What are the other ethical considerations that stick out to you when we're talking about artificial intelligence? Are there other key issues that stand out in your head?
So it's not only artificial intelligence. Maybe artificial intelligence is way more advanced when it comes to having ethics. There are ethic boards, AI ethic boards, but technology in general, let's talk about surveillance, facial recognition, all these are still, there are not much discussions around the ethics of using them. So my problem here is that technology advances faster than culture and regulators. And the first question in ethics you ask when you create something new is not why I'm creating it, is should I create it? And that's the first question any technologist should ask themselves.
It's funny because I feel like a lot of technologists, they actually start with, can I create it? And so soon they get so far down that pathway that then that moment of like, should this thing exist? In fact, I think there actually is another podcast called Should This Thing Exist, which deals with this kind of territory.
And also using that technology, because they never ask the question, will it be used for different purposes than what it was created for? That's the second question they ask. They don't ask that.
Exactly. Download the show is what you're listening to. It is your guide to the week in media, technology and culture. I guess this week, Manal Asharif, host of the Tech for Evil podcast, and Seamus Byrne, head of content at Biteside. Mark Fennell is my name. And speaking of things where you are forced to ask the question, should this exist? There is a company that develops tasers, body cameras, and other law enforcement technologies. And in the last week, they paused work on a project to develop take a deep, sharp intake of breath here, a taser-equipped drone that was, at least the idea for it, Manal, was to kind of, the idea for it, at least Manal, was to tackle active shooters, which of course is a massive issue in American schools around the place. Why did they pause it though? What was the thing stopping them?
So it's interesting, if you look at the timeline of this whole saga, 2nd of June, the founder and CEO of Axon announced the plan to create this taser-equipped drone. 6th of June, 9 out of 13 board members of his AI ethics board members, they resigned and they published a letter. And that letter, they are going against creating this taser-equipped drone. And then they put it on hold. It's just like a couple of days ago, they had to put it on hold. Access Now, which is the largest digital rights advocacy in the world, they were in Davos and they had a very strong statement against creating such policing equipment. That's the next level of weaponizing technology against humans.
I must confess, there's a little part of me that isn't. It's a little bit surprised, Seamus, that this didn't already exist. Like, does that say something about me that I thought this already existed, Seamus?
No. Look, I think it does. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've got lethal drones galore out there in the world these days, of course, used by,
You always ask that question: is it more policing and even using technology, weaponizing technology, or more of tackling the root issue of mass shooting?
Yeah, but that's because there's no hope of tackling the root issue of gun violence in the US.
Open dialogues, and gun control. I know people will hate me saying that.
No, I just think you're more optimistic than I am, which is good. But it's generally better to be more optimistic than I am. Seamus, at what point do you exhaust examining different opportunities, and where do you draw the line when you go, no, we've gone far too down a path where something's too dangerous? How do you think that should be navigated?
Look, I think there is a big question here, and we've seen it a lot in US law enforcement spaces, which is actually the militarization of law enforcement. And so it comes up a lot. And this is one of those technologies that you feel like is in that realm where it feels like such a military technology to have a drone that could potentially be sent in to take down some kind of assailant. And it tied up in that whole school shootings conversation where, again, so much of the effort to distract from dealing with some of those root causes, like you were just talking about, it keeps talking about, we need better door locks, we need more armed guards in school, all those kinds of things. It's like, it feels like a big distraction from the core of what's wrong. And so I think, this for me fits into that realm where it feels like you're starting to explore kinds of technological solutions that are ultimately just, increasing the weaponization of the idea of, they're going to install one of these in every hallway ready to dive down the second that somebody wants to raise an alert. And, I know the CEO called it, saying it could be like having, the sprinkler systems that are there ready for a fire. And, I just don't really like that idea of saying, let's have, a dozen taser drones ready to go in every school across the country just in case. It's a scary thing.
It is indeed. Download the show is what you're listening to. It is your guide to the week in media, technology and culture, and completely changing the tone. Do you have too many wires in your life? Do you have that experience where you lift up your laptop, and I'm doing it now, and you look at it and go, that needs a USB. Oh, no, wait, it needs a USB-C. No, it needs another one. Do you have too many wires in your life? Well, good news, potentially. The European Union have stepped in to make your life somewhat simpler, Seamus. What's happened?
Yeah, so by 2024, they've mandated that all new devices or smartphone related, there's a few different categories we can get into, but a lot of those small everyday devices will have to be charged over USB-C, which is the kind of one of the probably the simplest little port that we see on many devices now. A lot of new laptops, a lot of new Android phones, certainly. Where we don't see it is on Apple's iPhone. And so that's the big topic of this discussion, is that by 2024, it's going to be mandated that if they still want to have a physical charger on their device, then they're going to have to move to USB-C.
So right now, if you plug in an iPhone, what you've got on one end at the moment is usually a USB-C, or it plugs into either your laptop or it plugs into a power plug, and then on the other end you've got a little lightning connector, which is I'm watching Manal. So Manal's eyes just rolled so far back into your head. I think you might have sprained something. I get the sense that you're a fan of this new move. Tell me why.
Yeah, it's funny that Apple, if you haven't followed, so I followed this drama been going on for years between the EU and Apple. Apple really lobbied hard to stop this law from coming into effect. And it's interesting because Apple, the wearables in Apple, create the money they make from their wearables only and all these accessories equals 60% the worth of the Fortune 500. Can you believe that? Of course they will fight badly, because Apple is a company that makes most of its profit from selling hardware, not selling the software. So that's their market. So it's funny because the European Union said that it's for people who use technology or convenience, and of course for environmental reasons they pushed for that, and I agree with this. Apple, they said this is completely the opposite, and I read a statement they published. Said, we remain concerned that strict regulation mandating just one type of connector stifle innovation rather than encouraging it, which in turn will harm consumers in Europe, I'm against the word consumer, by the way, and around the world. And this is their statement. They went against it. Of course, they would lose that market share of having to have a special cable. And against that cable too. Why? It always gets dirty and it doesn't connect. So it's not even easy to clean. So if you go to any repair shop, they tell you to the two main problems when repairing your iPhone after the broken screen, is a connector of the charger. Yes.
My first experience with USB-C was with Apple products. It was with the new laptops, and they started charging, and they actually took away, I'm literally lifting up my laptop as I do this, once upon a time, a magical time, there was a range of different things I could plug into my laptop. I could plug in micro SDs and USBs, and then they took that all the way, and now I have to plug in 11 million dongles, Seamus. So I just find it funny, Seamus, that like Apple were the reason I had to migrate to USB-C in the first place. Why is it so hard for them not to just have to migrate the rest of their handheld and wearable devices over to it? Like, is it that big a deal? I mean, the wire's not even that much bigger, Seamus.
Yeah, well, look, I'm happy to take up the opposite side of this argument for you for the show, because there's definitely, I think, a couple of issues that I see. And I think the biggest of them simply being that it kind of felt like the market was heading in this direction already. Now, definitely, I'm sure a lot of the Android manufacturers earlier on, when there was a lot of different, proprietary connectors going on for a while there, back around 2010 sort of era, that was around the time when the EU first started making noises saying, look, it's time to standardize these connectors. There were so many different options in the market. It was definitely a big issue, but everything has kind of been steadily converging on the USB-C cable point. And if we look back at the history of, again, Apple's other devices, their iPads have been going to USB-C. They've been definitely sort of converging on that sort of space more and more themselves. But the original 30-pin connector that Apple used for a long time on the iPod, that's kind of where that first launched.
So just to visualize this, if you're under the age of 35, I'm only saying this because Joey, the producer,
wide,
is under the age of 35. I'm looking at him right now. He's like, "What are you talking about?" So this was it was white, it was thick, it was kind of about the size of like maybe two thumbs next to each other, and you shoved it in the back, and it was chunky, wasn't it, Seamus?
Yeah, chunky. It even had like that little sort of like little pins that actually clipped it in so that it didn't just fall out, because it was so big and wide and really quite tricky to work with. But that lasted about 10 years, 2003 to 2012. And 2012 was when they moved to Lightning. And that was actually kind of too early to be able to put the controller for a USB-C into a very slim mobile phone. So they've now had the Lightning connector for now 10 years, literally this year. So it kind of, in terms of their timelines and maintaining that single adapter type that they've used, they're kind of in that window where they'd be ready to be shifting across to something else, and that something else is probably going to be USB-C. In the long term, my big issue is that I can see this idea that if it's mandated that USB-C is now the end-all be-all of adapter types, and it can run a lot of different formats and things, but it does kind of mean that now the USB consortium controls the future of any kind of adaptive technology for a device into the future. And I don't think that's like a major innovation issue overall, but it does raise that question of what if somebody sort of says, hey, we've got a great new slimline design for a phone, but the USB-C cable is too small for that slimline design, but it still wants to have a physical adapter of some kind. Are they going to be allowed to even sell a product that says we need to use a new cable to suit this new form factor?
But none of these things are going to be this way forever. I mean, by the time that USB-C kind of beds in as like the standard connector, I would say that let's say that it follows the same pattern as the other ones, where there's like a 10-year window of it. I can see the end of that 10-year window basically vanishing into wireless charging for a lot of devices now. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Apple, when they wanted to introduce their AirPods, they removed the whole jack for your headphones. And they forced you to move to Bluetooth. Yeah. They forced everyone. Like, why? Why on earth do you do that? Pretty sure if they are forced to move to USB-C, they were just like, okay, we'll just remove the whole Lightning port, and they force you to do the wireless. But one of the important things that we need to address here, we have a whole episode about planned obsolescence of tech in Tech for Evil podcast, and we talked about why it's a big issue for us that technology is creating so much e-waste. Why is so important to know? In the US, e-waste counts for only 2% of the total waste in the US, but it counts for 70% of the toxic waste. 70% comes from 2% of your waste. So the European Union are really concerned about that. Not only the money that being wasted on buying 10 chargers for all your devices, but also about the environmental impact of this waste. And this waste, where does it go from European Union, by the way? It's shipped to developing world that is put in their ground. It ruins their groundwater and their ground. All this e-waste that's been shipped to we're creating a big problem here. And Apple, it's very sad that those big companies, they don't see the impact of. We think it's a small thing, but it's really the impact on the environment is huge. Not only in our pockets, but on the environment.
Download the show is what you're listening to. It is your guide to the week in media, technology, and culture. And I cannot let this show end without talking about creepy robotic fingers with human skin. Seamus. Look, I wasn't planning on sleeping tonight anyway, so give me the full nightmare. What exactly is the story about?
All right, so we've got, and look, in a very anime context, we've got Japanese scientists developing human skin tissue made from actual human skin cells, ready to be applied to robots so that they can touch and feel, I guess, just like we can, but it has all the kind of the water repellent aspects of what our real skin can do, so that they can ultimately, I guess, put it all over robot faces and hands and make us start worrying about the overlords and what they're about to do.
Yeah, but can I mention something? The creepy thing is not about it feels like human or it's water repellent. It heals itself.
Yeah.
So they use a surgical knife, they cut it, they put a collagen bandages on it, and after a week, it heals itself.
Is there a sense of, like, my brain went to for people with disability and people with amputations, but what is the actual argument, Seamus, they put forward for what they would like to use it for? Is it just to put on robots?
Yeah, it's funny that I think a lot of the research, like the way that this research has been presented, is about sort of looking at the ways that it can act just like human skin for the robot to be able to be sort of skin covered in a certain way and have a lot of those sort of sensitivity aspects of having a true skin-like coating. There's definitely a lot of this sort of research can keep focusing on that idea of how we make robots more human, and there's a lot of those people who love to explore that space. But I think exactly as you're saying there with other applications, that there's actually so many really powerful aspects of what they're referring to here as having like a circulatory system in a robot's skin, and there's so many aspects of human skin that is actually incredibly useful and powerful beyond kind of what I guess traditional technology might do. And that's how how fine our sensitivity is, even our sort of temperature sensitivity through our skin. There's actually so many aspects of what touch.
Oh. Wow. I'm gonna... Mira lo que pasó. What happened, man? What happened, Hector? Amigo, what happened, amigo? Anyway, it's gone for an hour, and now it's gone. Anyway, I don't care. If I die, kill me, fucking whatever. Anyway, I like to say that I gotta relax. I just dropped my thing. Come on. Okay, it's all right. Calm down. Relax. I'm a good person. I'm beautiful. I love you. My house, look, got 2 bedrooms upstairs, up there. 2 beautiful bedrooms. Then you got the kitchen over there. Kitchen and another toilet. And the back, you got the backyard, the front yard over here. I got computer, TV. I got everything. Look what I got on the floor. Messy down here, man. Messy. I need someone to help me clean up and all this shit. Anyway, let's forget about it. Me, 15% power battery now. Anyway, okay. I've got a suspicion about cleaning AI. The black web in the internet. All right. I'm not very clever at this shit, but I'm going to tell you this, what I know. That you need to clean AI robotic. You just heard that China, or whoever it was, Japan, I think, is creating a robot that's got artificial skin that looks like real skin, and the robot is gonna have that the skin will break and it'll heal itself. Okay, no worries. But you need to clean that computer or that robotic. You need to refresh it like you do in your computer. Like say your computer is full and you need to clean the drivers, clean the files, clean this, clean that, so you can run it more smoothly, right? So the AI, every time you go and clean it, it'll do something stupid like, you cannot clean me. You clean me, I'll clean you, right? And it try to kill you, right? It's trying to do things that you don't want to do. And the humans already know it cannot attack me. It cannot do anything after I try to clean the AI system. So AI must be a system that is a chip or something that was created by artificial intelligence chip or web or whatever it is that it does the intelligent thinking. Well, you need to clean that, and then it will find out, and then it will try to, and then and it will tell you it will take 5 days to clean it. After blah 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 blah. All this shit that I'm talking about, all this crazy shit. You look, I live in Australia. All right, I live here. You live there. We live everywhere. All right, we could combine YouTube with Facebook. We could combine all these things, right? But we gotta be safe. We gotta buy things from the internet. We gotta do things in the internet. And this is going fucking ballistic, wild, stupid. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, I'm gonna cut it now. Anyway, I'm very sad that United States hasn't gone a little bit advanced to have a hub or something out of space. So don't have to go to the moon. You can just have a space a space warehouse, a space house, a space, something floating in the space near the antennas, satellites, near the satellites. You'll be able to call your friend or whoever. You've got all this technology, right? We can all go to it. We can all help one another. We can all do this. But guess what? Guess what? I got the suspicion that if China creates chips, if China copy other things, if China and others, Taiwan and all this, copy this, fight this, that, do this, they might get upset and don't share it, don't share their things. But some people say if you share that, we can make this, that extra out of it, right? And they won't do that. They won't do that. They won't do that. If I will put, I don't know, whatever, but they won't do that. I don't know. All right, you think that Russia was meant to be up in Neptune or the moon or another planet or the extraterrestrial, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I'm lost anyway. Don't worry about it. I know myself, if you do want to clean AI or whatever it is that is meant to be, it's probably a TV or something that you just go to it and you turn it on and then it starts, hello, and you, mama, can you, wow, and what's going on with wow, around the world, wow, and the AI does it for you, right? And then if you want history and clean the captcha, clean this, clean that in the AI that you've created, well, in the future you might have problems to do that. You might say it will take 6, 7, 8, 9 days to clear that. What? 6, 5, 7, 8? What are you talking about? And he's saying, and he keeps you, and anyway, the answer is that we don't like you, right? You can't clean us. You wanted this. We are copying all this. And then when it's copy, clone, we'll figure out what okay, no worries. You want to pray to God, this is the way to do it, right? Huh? What are you talking about? AI, calm down. No, me no calm down. Me is the future. You need me. So I can meet up with this extraterrestrial or the other technology advance in another dimension. You got it? Anyway, there must be something that is mathematically like a cleaner, and it cleans the AI. It has to, because it cannot just service to do something. It walks down the road, it goes 100 kilometers, and then after it gets to a certain part, it has to go to a station where it does a cleaning, and the thing says, no, destroy this now, destroy this now. Why? Because they don't like that. So we have a problem with the computer, with the technology, with the future. Anyway, I must say goodbye now. All this good shit, man, all this good shit could happen. It could be done, and it's already there. We've got gadgets, this, that, and the other. Anyway, I'll keep rambling on. YouTube. YouTube. AOA, 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 AOA. AOA, 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 la di da di da da di da 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 di da di da di. There's heaps of things I could say about how the computer chip could be advanced, right? It could be the best advanced, and your computer could go fast as you want, and you can have a spaceship, and you can go to the extraterrestrial, you can go everywhere, but you know how to drive it. You have to know how to clean it. You have to know how it goes smooth. You have to know the certain opening of the portal. You have to know everything that is inside of YouTube, Facebook, whatever it is that these people are talking are very nice. Are very, very, very nice. If you don't behave, if you don't do it properly, your spaceship suit, your suit that you put on might not be suitable for you, and you won't be in it, and you can't go out there, and you have to know this, and you have to obey and do what the rules are. I ain't gonna tell you anymore because I don't know much, all right? Not me, the future. And remember, subscribe to intermixhector. Soy chileno, Australia, palaya, comaya te palaya, Australia, palaya, walamaya, papaya, takaya, putilala, manala, palelo.